Tonight, from our nation's capital, one-on-one with the architect of the war on terror.
There is no question but that the United States is determined to root out the al-Qaeda and the Taliban leadership that are linked to al-Qaeda at the hip.
Are U.S. airstrikes doing the job? What comes next? Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld, one-on-one. Also tonight, the anthrax scare. 2 cases, 1 death. Hundreds are tested. What's going on? Plus, airline security, tighter than ever. So how did this passenger get inside a cockpit so easily?
This is the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather. Special expanded coverage. America Fights Back. From CBS News in Washington, here is Dan Rather.
Good evening. America now controls the skies over Afghanistan. That declaration today from Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld. Later, in an exclusive interview with CBS News, the Secretary made it clear that he'll be surprised if the Taliban stays in power in Afghanistan when this is all over. More of that interview in a few minutes. On this 3rd night of aerial assaults in Afghanistan, U.S. forces targeted Kandahar, headquarters of the Taliban. Assessing yesterday's attacks, the Pentagon says 13 military and terrorist targets were struck, 80% were damaged. Taliban air defenses and military communications have now been shattered. In a statement released late today, Osama bin Laden's terror organization is threatening anew to bring the battle to the heart of America. With air supremacy secured, U.S. forces today launched their first daytime raids on Taliban and other terrorist targets and are now free to strike round the clock. Pentagon officials showed off before and after pictures of an attack on an al-Qaeda terrorist camp. In preparation for the coming 2nd phase of the military operations, U.S. cargo planes flew into Uzbekistan, where U.S. ground troops are expected to be deployed. Muslim protests against the U.S. attack spread today to the predominantly Muslim country of Indonesia, and 4 demonstrators were killed in anti-American protests in Pakistan. To bring you comprehensive coverage, the most comprehensive coverage possible, CBS News is reporting tonight from Washington and has correspondents deployed in key locations all around the world and across the USA. We began at the Pentagon with correspondent David Martin and the very latest on a war different from any we've seen before.
The Pentagon released the first satellite pictures of the damage the airstrikes have done. A runway cratered by satellite-guided bombs. A cluster of buildings that was one of Osama bin Laden's terrorist training camps carpet-bombed into a pile of rubble.
That's where they have their classrooms. That's where they discuss their various methods. It has firing ranges and other training facilities that allow them to practice.
It's not the first time the U.S. has destroyed one of bin Laden's camps, and nobody thinks this strike got him or any of his chief lieutenants.
The camps, Mick, were not heavily populated at the time we hit them.
Much of the damage done by the American strikes can be undone.
The runways that are damaged are not permanently damaged either. I mean, anything can be repaired and they can bulldoze in and fill it.
But the strikes did do irreparable harm to the leader of the Taliban, Mullah Muhammad Omar, when 2 close relatives were killed in an attack on his compound. That was deliberate. But on the outskirts of Kabul, 4 UN workers were killed when a stray weapon landed on their house.
All 4 died on the spot. Pieces of their bodies are still to be recovered from the wreckage.
As in any military operation, things go wrong, like this cruise missile hanging fire on a ship. But the Pentagon says the strikes damaged or destroyed 85% of the targets on the first night, although numbers like that are almost meaningless in this new kind of war.
That is old think, and that will not help you analyze what we're doing.
What they are doing is taking out Taliban air defenses so American planes are free to operate over Afghanistan anytime, day or night.
We feel like we have essentially air supremacy over Afghanistan now.
Jet fighters and spy planes will circle overhead looking for targets of opportunity, trying, in the words of one senior officer, to unhinge the Taliban by keeping them constantly under attack. The U.S. has yet to hit some of the Taliban's most valuable targets, including warehouses full of opium, their single biggest source of revenue. The strikes have also left an escape route for any members of the Taliban looking for a way out.
I would add that a number of their aircraft are still available to them as well as helicopters.
Besides constant air attacks, the Taliban and bin Laden also have to fear advances by rebel armies being aided by the CIA, as well as raids by American commando units. The aircraft carrier Kitty Hawk, its decks cleared of fighter aircraft to serve as a mobile base for special operations forces, is now in the Indian Ocean. The Pentagon's battle plan is beginning to shift gears, moving from the overt war of airstrikes to the covert war of spies and commandos. Dan?
David Martin at the Defense Department. Late today, a spokesman for Osama bin Laden's al-Qaeda network appeared on an Arab television network out of the Persian Gulf to praise the September 11th attacks against the United States and threaten more of the same. The spokesman is a renegade Kuwaiti. He was last seen in a video made shortly before the attacks sitting next to bin Laden. In today's statement, the spokesman describes the mass murders of Americans as plane storms.
Americans must know that those plane storms will never be quiet by the will of the Almighty God, and that there are more thousands of young people in the nation that seek death as much as Americans love life. We let them know that by attacking the Islamic land of Afghanistan, they opened another door for more animosity and conflict between us and the infidel forces. We believe that with the help of God and the material and psychological strength and the confidence that we have, that even though they have the greatest technology and greatest weapons, we will be victors, and that the Americans have opened a door upon themselves that will never be shut down.
He called the, quote, holy war against the United States, and again I quote, the duty of all Muslims. On the ground in Afghanistan, it's apparent the ongoing U.S. air attacks have damaged the Taliban's ability to wage war. And at their bases in northeastern Afghanistan, that is just what the anti-Taliban Minority Tribes United Front wants to hear. CBS's Elizabeth Palmer is near the front lines.
The first daytime airstrikes today hit the cities of Kandahar, Kabul, and Herat. Herat, which is a western city, was apparently targeted because it has one of the largest airfields in Afghanistan. Today I spoke with a top general here who told me that so far the United Front is very encouraged by the results of the airstrikes, which have crippled the Taliban's military position. The longer they go on, the better for the United Front. So according to the general, they're not going to launch their main ground offensive until this round of airstrikes is over. The United Front had promised the United States that it would close the airspace it controls for 5 days. So that means that the main ground war here in the north could begin as early as Friday. Although all the attention is focused on Kabul, both the Taliban and the United Front have a majority of their soldiers up north. Here is where the decisive ground war will be fought. The primary goal for the United Front is to recapture the city of Mazar-e-Sharif. It's a Taliban stronghold, and it also has the only airfield in the north that can handle large transport planes. So whoever controls this city holds the key to supplying northern armies with essential weapons to win the offensive. So far, local reports say the U.S. airstrikes on Mazar-e-Sharif have destroyed the Taliban defense headquarters and knocked out the electrical substation and the city's anti-aircraft defenses. But the airstrip remains undamaged, and United Front forces say they're now within 40 miles of the city's center. As these strikes continue, reports are trickling in that Taliban commanders are beginning to defect to the United Front. We learned today that about 1,000 men in the center of the country have switched their allegiance, which gives the anti-Taliban opposition a new toehold in enemy territory. Dan?
Elizabeth Palmer reporting live from northern Afghanistan. Over Afghanistan, U.S. Navy and Air Force pilots are confirming that this is a different kind of war. In the Persian Gulf and in Kosovo, it took weeks of bombing to seize control of the skies. In Afghanistan, it's taken less than 3 days, as CBS's Mark Phillips reports from the USS Enterprise in the Arabian Sea.
Success and frustration reported by returning pilots today. Success in hitting some targets, including Taliban MiG jet fighters on the ground. The Taliban Air Force never posed much of a threat. It poses even less now. After just 2 nights of bombing, many planes of the USS Enterprise returned to the carrier with full bomb loads. Some had their missions extended to more than 6 hours, double the normal flight time. refueled again and again as they search for targets. They're not easy to find when the adversary has little in the way of conventional infrastructure, bases, fuel and ammunition dumps to hit. The pilots talk of bombing known al-Qaeda bases, but have no idea if anyone was there.
We dropped bombs on a terrorist camp, terrorist training camps.
The term used is asymmetrical warfare, the Goliath of the U.S. Navy trying to hit the David of Osama bin Laden's terrorists and his Taliban supporters. And in Afghanistan, this campaign may have already reached the point of making the rubble bounce. For the pilots, there is perhaps less risk in attacking an enemy without sophisticated air defenses and more difficulty finding him. But for them, the sharp end of the war against terrorism is where they want to be.
We do feel that we're fortunate to be in a position where we hope we can do something to honor the memories of those that were lost and to try to decrease the chance of something like that happening again.
The problem with attacking an unconventional enemy is that the conventional rules don't apply. These planes aren't attacking an army, they're attacking an idea, a commitment, and that's a more difficult target to hit.
Mark Phillips, amid the noise on the carrier deck, reporting from aboard the USS Enterprise in the Arabian Sea. With the first phase of the war coming to an end, I went inside the Pentagon today for an exclusive interview with former Navy carrier pilot, now Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld. Mr. Secretary, how long do you expect the campaign in Afghanistan to go along at or anywhere near the current level? I mean, you're talking days, weeks, months?
Well, I think by campaign, you're probably referring to the bombing and the cruise missiles. The important thing is that the campaign must be used and understood to be in the broadest sense. We're so conditioned as a people to think that a military campaign has to be cruise missiles and television images of airplanes dropping bombs, and that's just false. This is a totally different war. We need a new vocabulary. We need to get rid of old think and start thinking about this thing the way it really is. These people live in shadows.
Is it or is it not the policy of the United States government to remove the Taliban from power?
Well, if you think about it, Taliban has taken over about 90% of that country. It has invited in foreign terrorists that are functioning worldwide. It has oppressed its people. It is starving millions of Afghans. It has misserved the Afghan people. And there is no question but that the United States is determined to root out the al-Qaeda and the Taliban leadership that are linked to al-Qaeda at the hip.
But you've been very careful in your language, if I'm wrong about this, correct me, in saying the bin Laden network and the Taliban leadership that's connected to that network. That's a different thing than saying we're not going to have a Taliban government in Afghanistan.
Well, I'd be amazed if there were a Taliban government in Afghanistan when this thing is over. But the reason I'm careful and measured in my words is it's not for me to decide. It's for the Afghan people to decide. And what we are determined to do is to stop the exporting of terrorism from that country.
Mr. Secretary, a ranking Defense Department official said privately today that while the airstrikes have been what he called very successful, that they have not yet hit, and these are his words, targets most important to the Taliban. What does that mean?
The fact of the matter is that we have been proceeding in an orderly way. We've been successful with respect to most of the airfields, and we still have a good many of their aircraft and helicopters and transport planes that have not been hit. I don't know what he might have meant unless it was the leadership, and we suspect that Omar is still alive, and if that's what is meant, that the command and control and leadership structure may still be intact, I would guess that's probably a correct assessment.
What about the coalition? Shaky? Would you agree with that description?
Well, there isn't a coalition, really. There are coalitions, plural.
Can we or can we not fly combat aircraft off Saudi Arabian soil?
Well, Saudi Arabia and every other country, I made a decision early on that it made a lot of sense for us to say, look, let's let other countries characterize what they do. Why should the United States run around trying to characterize what other countries are doing?
I want to move on, but back to the question. Can we or can we not fly combat aircraft off Saudi soil?
I'll go back to the answer. We allow each country to characterize their assistance for this effort themselves, and it's the wisest thing to do, and it's working very well for us.
When will we know we've succeeded?
When you and I and our children get up and walk out the door and don't worry that an airplane is going to come down and hit us, or a truck bomb is going to drive into a building, or the World Trade Center is going to fall down.
Secretary Rumsfeld finds himself at a moment in history unlike any other. He is fighting a war provoked by an attack on his own headquarters. Now the Pentagon itself is a crime scene, and there is a dreadful hole, not just in the building, but in the hearts of the men and women here who lost 126 friends and co-workers.
You're the only Secretary of Defense in history that had the Defense Department itself hit by enemy forces. How do you feel personally with that? How do you react on a personal level to that?
Well, I think it shows that free people are vulnerable to people who decide they want to try to terrorize the world. And terrorists can attack at any time, at any place. They can use any conceivable technique. I was sitting right there being briefed by my CIA briefer when the whole building shook. It is clearly it's a memory you won't forget.
As regards the attacks of September 11th, was it, in your opinion, a failure of intelligence or a failure of imagination?
If you know anyone whose imagination was sufficient to think of plastic knives and the use of a U.S. airliner filled with American people as a missile to destroy a World Trade Center, before it happened, I'd be amazed.
Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld. Coming up next here on the CBS Evening News from Washington, what you need to know about the anthrax scare. Amid the fear, we'll give you the facts.